Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Adi Achint. Now that the dust is settled after Prime Minister Modi's visits to the US and France, we should be able to now make some sense of what is happening. There were a lot of things spoken about: a submarine, the firefighters, engines, defense technology, MRO, this, that, and the other. There was so much that was flying around the place that one needs a little time to step back, think, see what is actually happening on the ground, and then figure out where this relationship is headed. For that, I have someone really special, someone who takes deep dives. And we've seen that in the previous episodes that I've shot with Lieutenant General Anil Ahuja, who's from the Vivekananda International Foundation, a distinguished fellow, who's going to tell us today what is this strategic relationship all about? Is it plain simple hedging of bets, or is India and France looking at a very long-term game going forward? So, sir, firstly, thank you so much for taking out the time and coming to the channel once again. And I'm looking forward to hearing your views, especially after time is gone by and the dust actually has settled down.
Thank you very much, Adi. Pleasure being with you once again. And yes, I think we do need to talk about India France relations because it hasn't engaged as much of attention as perhaps India US relations have. So it would be worth having a look at this, if I may say, a newer relationship.
Absolutely. So let's open up, let's just give a background sort of a thing. India and France have a very good relation. What time se chal raha hai? It's been there. Military wise speaking, we've been using French equipment since I think 50s and 60s. There have been bilateral discussions. There've been a whole lot of exchanges, and of course, the role of the Indian military during the First World War and the Second World War is not lost on the French as well. Let's just tell us, what is this strategic partnership all about? So, what are the common perspectives that bring these two countries together, and then we'll kind of flow into the discussion.
Okay, Adi, let's start from our independence onwards. I mean, you've uh, you've alluded to our participation in the world wars, our earlier association, but let's start 47 onwards. We've had diplomatic relationship right since 47, and this was elevated to strategic partnership in 1998. Now, that year, French President then, Jacques Chirac, he visited India as the chief guest at the Republic Day Parade, January 26, 1998. And that time, we started our strategic dialogue and a strategic relationship started building. And this is what has found a significant mention even in the title of the joint statement between our Prime Minister and the French President, the recent visit. Now, the same year in 1998, you would recall, on 11th and 13th May 1998, we carried out our 5 nuclear tests in Pokhran. We are all aware of it, the 25th anniversary of this year. Now, France was the only P5 country to defy US led sanctions against India. Now, this remains a significant landmark in our relationship. And like I said, this has been significantly highlighted in the joint statement. Now, actually, if you look at it, India has strategic partnerships with good about 35 odd countries, plus or minus. But the kind of significance that has been given is is important to take note of. Now, come forward to 1999 Kargil conflict. France clearly held Pakistan side responsible for what they call is a dangerous initiative by Pakistan. Later, in 2008, after we got the NSG waiver for nuclear trade. You would recall post the Indo-US civil nuclear deal. In 2008, when we got the NSG waiver, France was the first country to sign civil nuclear pact with India in September 2008. Now, come further. After, for us today, after Russia, France is the largest supplier of arms to us, and its share has increased from about 18% or so, which it used to be about 10-15 years back, to nearly 29-30% today, if you look at it. Now, let's look at its relationship in our immediate neighborhood with Pakistan. Now, in the decade starting late 60s to about 90s, France was a significant source of defense equipment for Pakistan, in particular to the Pakistan Air Force and to Pakistan Navy. They gave them Mirage 3s, they gave them Mirage 5s, also gave them submarines in 90s. However, come to 2011, France stopped selling heavy military hardware to Pakistan. Now, with us, you made a reference to the equipment that we procured from France significantly mid 80s. We started getting these Mirage 2000s. You know the role that they have played from Kargil to Balakot, what they have played. We started getting these, and they have been upgraded to sustain them in our service till the next decade. Now, closer to now, 2016, we or 16-17, we concluded the Rafale deal, and we've got the complete consignment of 36 Rafale aircraft. And we've also had cooperation for making the Scorpion submarines at Mazagon docks. 6 of these have been constructed so far. Additional acquisitions are under consideration, they are in the pipeline. And besides the defense and besides the political aspects, now we've had huge cooperation in counterterrorism. Even when Article 370 was abrogated, France clearly supported India, saying that it's India's internal affair. And as a P5 member, it played a significant role. And therefore, it's strategically significant for us. And then, of course, India is equally important for France also. It is from the perspective of security of the Indian Ocean region, where they have their French territories. And definitely, they also need cooperation with us for maintaining security in the Indian Ocean region. And of course, we have a huge market. And more recently, with the G20 here, France considers India as an interface with the global south. So, if you look at the entire spectrum, there is a good reason for which we've come close. There is a strategic rationale, there's an economic rationale, there's a political rationale for it. So it's a good foundation for a long-term relationship.
The interesting thing that you brought about is that there are mutually beneficial connections, and I think that is, of course, well known that it is a base for any country to go forward with regards to a bilateral relation. So, but what makes France different? That's something that we need to understand. There is UK, which is fair enough, UK. There's Germany, there's Poland, there's multiple other nations. Of course, the big guys are these. What makes France special?
Yes, it's a it's a very valid question. That what's so different about France? And you rightly compared it with number of other European countries. Now, if I was to pick up one trait of France that we in India can identify it most closely to it, is the quest for autonomy. In the
Strategic
current
autonomy.
day parlance, let's call it strategic autonomy if you wish to. Now, it's the trait of free thinking on global issues that is ingrained in France and that's ingrained in us. No wonder, you know, in I was reading in one of the reports, I think put out by CSIS recently, that one of the senior diplomats of a G7 country and a country which is also a member of the Quad, he suggested that France and India are perhaps the most difficult countries to deal with. Well, uh, whether it's a compliment, whether it's an observation, but the fact remains that there are things in our approach where we want our autonomy, we want to make our decisions in coordination and cooperation with everyone, but with primacy to our national interests. And this trait is not recent, it is deeply ingrained. Let me give you five, six instances starting from about 60 years back till about last month. Let's run through a couple of them to reinforce the point that I'm making. Back in 50s and 60s, uh, French was struggling, particularly with the US and UK, to get a better voice in NATO. Now, in 66, when the NATO headquarter had shifted from London to Paris in the 50s. Now, that was the time in 66, France pulled out of NATO military command structures. Now, this resulted in NATO headquarter being moved out from Paris to Brussels, and they remained out of this military structure, command structure, uh, till quite recently, till 2009. And during all this period, while France has been a member of NATO, it has retained control over its own nuclear assets, despite being a part of that alliance. Uh, Look at the recognition of People's Republic of China. While the UK recognized PRC, People's Republic of China, in 72, Americans recognized in 1979, the French had done that in 1964. In the recent days, come closer. In September 2021, when AUKUS was signed, now you would recall that France, for some duration, pulled out its ambassadors from the US, from Australia. Come 2023, now April 2023, we know that President Macron visited China with a delegation of about 50, 60 businessmen, and his statements of not getting dragged into US China conflict over Taiwan, or getting caught in a crisis that's not of their own making, well, they did raise eyebrows in the Western countries,
Everywhere. Hmm.
everywhere. Uh, Come last month, we had the NATO summit at Vilnius in Lithuania. Now, it was France which prevented the setting up of NATO liaison office in Japan because it felt that it would be provoking China. So, what I'm trying to say is that this trait of looking after national interests, taking independent decisions with friends, with partners, but the primacy of national interests has been paramount. And when Prime Minister was going to Paris before his departure, in one of the interviews, the French ambassador to India, he did make a mention that we are not constrained by US ITAR regulations, which most Western countries, uh, you know, they are constrained by ITAR, International Trade in Arms Regulations. They are
Mm.
constrained by it. Now, I'm not taking everything at the face value. There are things when you go deeper into it, but it's just to highlight that France is a country which can take independent decisions, which is in sync with our thought process in multipolarity, and it can be relied to take decisions on its own merit. And not everything is right. French are, I mean, hard negotiators as far as the defense deals are concerned, as far as business deals are concerned. Every country will safeguard its interests, but it will not get swayed away blindly by the sanctions imposed by another country. So that is the most significant trait, I think, in from my perspective, in the French national trait, if I may call it.
You know, the it's very interesting that these two countries are kind of aligning on this national strategy, if I may call it so, of being kind of separated out of the entire game. Having said that, the current politic is completely different. We'll probably talk about that towards the end, sir. But I wanted to ask you, uh, Prime Minister Modi went there. There's a huge angle of defense which has come out. Purchases, everybody knows. I think Rafale and this and that, everything is there. What are the long-term connotations of these purchases? The defense being a part of this joint statement. So they spoke about MRO. They spoke about a whole lot of different things, which builds up on a certain baseline within India. How do you see this whole commentary that came out of the meeting of both the leaders?
Okay. See, there are two parts to your question. Let me handle these two separately. One is that we've had a very expansive statement. We've had a long, very comprehensive joint statement which has come out. There are things which have been included in it, including like what you said for our defense cooperation issues, and there are other things which were spoken of before Prime Minister went to France. The DAC gave an approval while he was en route to France on certain things, and there were issues which were mentioned in the press conference before the meetings, but they did not find a mention in the joint statement. So let me take these two separately. And if you look at this joint statement, look at the very title of it. It says Horizon 2047, 25th anniversary of India France strategic partnership towards a century of India France relations. Three aspects: Horizon 2047, 25th anniversary of strategic partnership, and 100 years and beyond. Now, like I have always said, I already mentioned that we have strategic partnership with 35 odd countries, not underscored to this extent, even in the title of the joint statement. Now, this statement broadly got is laid out in three parts. One is the partnership for security and sovereignty, which includes primarily the question that you asked related to the defense cooperation. The second is about the partnership for planet, and third is about the partnership for people. I leave that out for the constraints of time. And now, when you come to partnership for security and sovereignty, let me pick up six important issues. Firstly, they've alluded to building our sovereign defense capability together. Now, it touches on complementing our endeavor for Atmanirbharta, for our self reliance. And a mention is also made of a defense industrial cooperation roadmap, something quite akin to when Secretary Lloyd Austin came here in early June. The kind of defense industrial roadmap that we spoke of, something of that nature, according to broadly. Now, in the aeronautical domain, it alludes to joint development of combat engines, and in particular, the helicopter engines, and talks of Safran engines being developed for Indian multi-role helicopter. And it also alludes to joint development of critical components and technology uh, as the building blocks for it. Now, in many statements, many figures have been given: 80% transfer of technology, 90%, 100% transfer of technology. Well, I would just like to suggest that we be moderate in our expectations. To my understanding, my limited understanding, neither can 80, 90, or 100% technology be transferred overnight, nor can it be absorbed overnight. That's what I believe. And I temper my own expectations by certain statements, like the joint statement makes a mention the contract being concluded between Safran Helicopters and HAL for transfer of technology for forgings and castings of Shakti engines. Well, these are really not high technology things, but we would have to wait and see and not let our expectations soar to unrealistic levels. That's just my suggestion. Then, in the maritime domain, we have alluded to the success of our P75 program, and in generic terms, referred to exploring more ambitious projects, maybe additional submarines. I'll come to it later. And then there's some collaboration with Garden Reach Workshop for
Hmm.
construction of ships. And to progress all this, DRDO opening an office at our mission in Paris. Now, this was the first point related directly to the defense cooperation. Let me touch on five others before I come on to certain aspects that have been omitted from the statement. Now, the second aspect is ensuring security and safeguarding economic interests in the Indian Ocean, in the Indo-Pacific region. Now, please look back to 2018. India and France have signed a joint strategic vision in the Indian Ocean region. And extending this cooperation to Pacific, now France is laying emphasis on extending this to New Caledonia, to the area of French Polynesia, in the general area of Australia and New Zealand to the east, where we can extend our reach, where we can extend our cooperation. And then uh, it talks of trilateral partnership, and particular mention has been made of UAE and Australia, the countries with which both of us have strategic partnerships. And then is the issue of Indo-Pacific triangular development cooperation. Here, the stated emphasis is more on climate and sustainable development goals. The third aspect is cooperation in space. And that is significant because India and France have had a fairly deep space cooperation since early 60s, about 64 or so. And much closer, a strategic space dialogue has been instituted. The first meeting was held in Paris in the end of June, around 25th, 26th June. Now, ISRO and CNES, which is the France National Space Agency, they've been cooperating, they've been coordinating, and quite like the 2018 vision for Indo-Pacific, we also have a joint vision for space of 208 vintage only. We are planning a constellation of 8 to 10 satellites for maritime surveillance in the Indian Ocean. Then there's a talk of Trishna satellite mission. Now, Trishna stands for Thermal Infrared Imaging Satellite for High Resolution of Natural Resources Assessment. Now, this is supposed to be launched in 2024. It's an ambitious project. And we are also developing our capability for space situational awareness, for the safety and security protection of our mutual space based assets. The fourth aspect is about cyber cooperation. And we are cooperating in various UN efforts which are underway. And we've agreed to evolve closely, uh, cooperate in evolving International Convention of Countering ICT for criminal purposes. So, cooperation in cyberspace. Fifth is cooperation in terrorism, countering radicalization, combating terrorist financing, cooperation between our NSG and France's gendarmerie. So, we cooperate in cyber, we cooperate in space, we cooperate for counterterrorism, and then you come to science and technology, innovation and academic cooperation. Now we are talking of scientific cooperation, then deepening cooperation between startups, innovation ecosystem, cooperation in critical technologies. You would recall our ISAT with America. And quite akin to that initiative on critical and emerging technologies. Here again, we are looking at cooperation for supercomputing, cloud computing, AI, quantum, uh, global partnership in AI, generally the spheres that we have been speaking of with the Americans. And cooperation in digital technology, DPI, etc. So it's a very expansive thing. So this is what is included in defense per se and in other security related domains. So that's why I picked up these six issues. Now, there are certain important things which, the media and everybody had been expecting to be included in the joint statement, which came as a shock to some people, to journalists, shock to the journalists. I mean, they some of them started the narrative that, oh, it's perhaps because of the pressure of a third country that these have not been included. Well, what's not been included is acquisition of 26 Rafale, the marine versions for our navy, and order for three additional Scorpion submarines as a follow-up of P-75 program. And then setting up of certain MRO facilities, in particular for the M88 engines for our Rafales. Now we use a lot of French engines. We use them in our Cheetal helicopters, in our ALH, in our Mirage 2000s. We have certain base overall and MRO facilities existing for these. But for Rafale, we've spoken of setting up the MRO facilities. Now, let me touch on these. That why have they not been included? To my assessment, see, you look at procuring 26 more Rafales for Navy. Now, this entails DSE has already given the approval, it's there in the media all over. Now, a deal of this magnitude requires the sanction of Cabinet Committee on Security. And secondly, after you got all these approvals, it requires commercial negotiations. Commercial negotiations on the price of it, on what we want, what payloads do we want on it, what is going to be the delivery schedule, and many other aspects. There are various guarantees. Now, all these aspects are, after all, commercial. The two governments may have decided, but you are deciding it with a commercial entity. And if it comes in a joint statement, it's a fait accompli. So
Yeah.
I think it's prudence. And we saw when instead of 126 Rafale, we got 36 only. But the follow up actions and the difficulties that were experienced, the political fallout of that, we found all the controversies that were roaming around. I think it's prudent that let the negotiations, let the commercial process and the official process take its own course, and in due course of time, we can finalize it when the time is ripe. Now, second, about the submarines. The Scorpion submarine program, P-75, commenced around 2005 or so. Now, normally, many of these contracts have an option clause of getting 50% of the orders on the same terms and conditions, but that's applicable for a limited period of time. It doesn't extend for 2 decades. So, again, should we find it prudent to have three more submarines? Well, perfectly fine. But these will again have to be negotiated. The commercial aspects and the technical aspects will have to be negotiated. So it makes sense not to prematurely include them. And to me, looking at it as as a former person who's been in the acquisition system, I feel that this will avoid controversies and it will perhaps hasten the equipment coming into India rather than getting bogged down. So these are some of the things that have not been included. And then there's a talk of center of excellence for gas turbine technology, and developing engines for our combat aircraft, for our AMCA. Well, on the US side, we are talking of G414 engines. On this side, we are talking of engines with France. I think, let it be for the time being. I'm sure people who are deeply and directly involved in it will take these decisions in due course. Uh, let's let's not reach any conclusion. It may be premature as of now.
Hmm. One of the things that we see is, sir, the narrative came out of only three particular newspapers, which is very interesting, and it was led by only one newspaper, which has a tendency of putting out garbage, if I may. you know, it's a good. I think these newspapers need to realize that their value has come down to Belpuri outers now. That's it's quite sad when we see
I'll
that.
leave it at that. So
No,
what I
it's quite
saying
sad when
is,
we see that, sir, because these are strategic issues. Jokes apart, when you come down to something like this, these are strategic issues which are going to be impacting your defense and stuff like that. Uh, it needs to be handled with a little more care than anything else. So, what I want to
you're
actually
absolutely
ask you,
correct.
yeah,
We need, you know, we need to maintain the sanctity of the system. We need
exactly.
due diligence, and in hurry, you land up in controversies. You land up in complications.
This is stupidity,
It
sir.
took it took decade and a half for Bofors to prove themselves in Kargil, for that controversy to be put on the back seat. So I think there is there is
That's the point.
merit
That's the
in
point I'm
being
driving at.
diligent about it.
Yeah. And the whole policy of media outlets to be the fastest finger first. Oh, we brought it first. I find that to be ridiculous, especially when you're dealing with defense. And somewhere down the line, I mean, jokes apart, but newspapers and media outlets need to realize that, I mean, mine is a very small channel, but alternative news sources are going to kill them if they keep on doing stuff like this. So
Absolutely.
it's amazing that they play with these kind of things. So you know, the biggest point about strategic autonomy, which brings comes to me, is hedging my bets uh, with friends and foe alike. So when I'm talking about defense with France, am I hedging my bets with one or the other or both?
See, uh, in defense, of course, the most ideal, the most ideal proposition would be self-reliance. We're wanting to achieve it. It's some distance away. So we'll talk of the reality.
Hmm.
And we cannot go from one sole dependency to another sole dependency or consider one as a direct substitute for another. We have a large inventory. There are segments. There are segments which are best suited for acquisitions from a particular country, and there are other segments suited for B particular country. Now, you look at our arms acquisitions. Now, I had just mentioned to you broadly, globally speaking, France is the third highest global arms exporter, and it's remained so for very long time. And in India, as far as the sources of acquisition of arms are concerned, we have acquired arms primarily from four sources: from Russia, from France, from America, from Israel. Now, coming on to, let me take between France and Russia. Leave aside America and leave aside Israel for the purpose of our discussion right now. Now, around 2010, 2011 or so, uh, France's share, the global share, used to be about 5.5%, and the Russian share used to be about 25, 26%. So while America retains a constant share of 30 to 40% of global arms, Russia plus France has remained nearly 30%. You get the 30 to 40% is given for US. But इन दोनों का बराबर करके फ्रांस और रशिया का टोटल करके लगभग 30% बनता है. In 2010-11, like I said, France used to have a share of about 5.5%, and uh, these guys, 5.5% or so, and Russians used to have. Now today, uh, we what has happened is that the share of France has come up. The Russian arms share has reduced from about 25, 26% to about 16% today, globally. And the French share has come to about 11, 12%. यानी जितना उनका घटा लगभग इनका उतना बढ़ गया. So अभी तक ये दोनों they occupy 30% of the space. So that is one as far as the global supplies are concerned today. The second aspect which the global analysis takes into account, uh, or these analysts sitting at CIPRI and all, they also look at the future order books. Now, today, when you look at the future order books, the orders that are there with France in most of the equipment are much more than the orders that are there with Russia. If you look at combat aircrafts, France has orders for 200 plus aircraft, whereas Russia has orders for about just about 80, 84 aircraft. You look at warships. France has orders for about 20 or 20, 21 warships, whereas Russia has got orders only for about 5. Armored vehicles other than tanks. France 500 plus, Russia just about 50 odd. Artillery guns 175, 176 for France, practically nil on the order book of Russians. Russia, however, has more orders for tanks per se, 500 odd tanks. So, what I've tried to tell you is, why I gave you this picture. That in terms of arms share, naturally, as the Russian arms share has gone down over last 1 or 2 decades, progressively the French share has increased. That is one. And this trend is evident in the future orders also. Now, it would be rather simplistic to say one is a substitute for the other. No. But yes, France also has a fairly large basket. France can be a suitable substitute, but then all countries will have their own place. And perhaps in the days to come, we'll continue to maintain our relationships with all the 4 countries. The percentages will vary based on our plans of acquisitions. Sorry, I lost your. I
My apologies. What I find interesting is the French interest and the French lookout towards the Indo-Pacific and their own independent stand with regards that, as per their general foreign policy, which is again strategic autonomy. Uh, the AUKUS was a big slap to the French, and they kind of took it very roughly, as a matter of fact, for the initial some time. A lot of people call the deal with India as a pushback and as a counter from the French towards uh, the so-called AUKUS alliance against with in partnership with India. One, how do you see that? And two, how do you see the French engagement increasing in the Indo-Pacific, which is, of course, the main battleground, sir? And any cooperation, Quad plus India becomes AUKUS plus one or whatever. I mean, do you kind of see anything coming in with regards to French actually starting to get involved in this region in a little more substantiative way?
see, definitely, uh, AUKUS was a rude shock to France, which we saw, and France made no bones about it, of showing their anger, showing their you know discomfort at this kind of an arrangement coming right under their nose. But and yes, as the third largest arms exporter. And if you take the Western world, the second largest arms exporter in the Western world, if you leave Russia, the second one out, definitely there is a competition for market space. For our navy, for the aircraft, the competition has been between Rafale and F-18. We know that. So there is a competition for space. Now, whether you directly want to relate it to AUKUS, you don't want to do it, well, we'll leave it to the people who weave stories, we'll leave it to that. But yes, for the market that is available, there would be a competition, and India is attractive even to France as far as our commercial market is concerned, as far as our defense market is concerned. Number two, France has a significant presence in the Indian Ocean region. I mentioned about Caledonia, I mentioned about French Polynesia, and you know Reunion Islands. They have their presence in Djibouti, they have their presence in UAE. Definitely, they have their interests, direct interests in the Indian Ocean. Now, you mentioned in your question that whether it would be AUKUS plus India. Let me just turn your question a little bit. Would it be Quad plus France? Let's look at it that way. To my mind, as I look at it, uh, Quad plus France to me is unlikely. We have a large number of trilaterals, as you know. US, India, Japan, US, India, Australia, India, Japan, Australia, etc., etc. There are a large number of trilaterals. No, will there be a trilateral like France, US, India? Again, I would say unlikely, because France, which has a joint strategic vision with India of 2018 vintage. Now, France would, to my mind, like to see India France relations on their own standing rather than being an extension of India US relationship. So, to that extent, while all of us will coordinate with each other, we are friendly countries. Perhaps France will also coordinate with US, we'll also coordinate with US, we'll also coordinate with other Quad partners. But France becoming a member of Quad or India US France trilateral, to me, it seems unlikely. The next aspect is France vis a vis US as partnership in the Indo-Pacific. Now, there are there are serious concerns, serious competition, or global power competition between US and China. And yes, India is part of the US perspective on the network of partnerships and allies in the Indo Pacific. Whereas France, as far as China is concerned, France has its huge economic interests with China. You know, in 2021, they made a France 2030 investment plan. Now they are looking at much greater investments in China. They want to increase their trade, commerce, investment. Very recently, during that Macron's visit, you had the Chinese buying another 160, placing an order for another 160 Airbus aircraft, and another assembly line being set up in China. So, to expect that France will probably support us strategically in meeting the China challenge, perhaps that would be an unrealistic expectation. So that's how I look at it. Look at our relationship, our strategic relationship from the perspective of our capability in the Indo-Pacific region. So there'll be distinct difference in helping us build our capability in cooperating in this region between both of us for mutual benefit, vis-a-vis taking any direct stance should we have a requirement or during the period of confrontation with China.
Indeed, that makes quite a lot of sense, because at the end of it, you need to have uh, a system created before you start doing anything else in terms of the strategic competitions. So the I mean, I think this is a very well-rounded discussion with regards to countries that are, if I may, independently thinking about their future. Um, Having said that, France today geopolitically seems a little entangled within the Ukraine crisis. So, um, and you one can see the frustration within the French system that they're not wanting to be a part of this game, but the sheer factor of NATO kind of keeps them there. Uh, just a last final comment, sir. How do you see them? Because I find there are only two countries that could break that deadlock which is there in Ukraine, is Germany and France. Germany is too weak and too, for the lack of a better word, just shut off in the brain to even think. But French, I still have a little hope. Would you see any sort of a change in their tactic with regards to Ukraine, so that they can really sell the factor that they believe in about strategic autonomy, sir?
See, you, I'm sure you followed French president's visit, 3 days visit to China in April this year. And yes, uh, President Macron, he did extensively raise the subject of China, seeking China's indulgence in bringing the Ukraine conflict to an end. Well, perhaps. How much of influence can they have? Would the American influence be overriding in this? How much can they work within the transatlantic alliance? How much influence can they have? I think it's very hard to make any concrete predictions about it, but definitely more than others, they have made an effort, they are making an effort. And even like I said, during the NATO conference, the liaison office in setting it up in Japan, well, to underscore that thing that it will, it will create more instability. Perhaps they mentioned it in the context of China, or trying to bring China around to uh, help in bringing Ukraine war to an end. We can see their contribution more than others, but how much will they be able to influence? I really won't be able to hazard a deeper guess into this.
Thank you, sir. I think that's. I keep saying that Ukraine war is going to change the world, and let's see how it does actually going forward. Thank you so much for bringing out this interesting discussion, because one needs to take deep dives into bilateral relations to kind of understand, one, where they stand today, and two, where they're going to go in the future, and what the, of course, the real intent is not really seen or not really spoken about, but what information we can gather, what signs that we can see, we can obviously piece together a very realistic picture of what's happening. And thank you once again, sir, and looking forward for more such deep dives in the future. Till then, sir, Jai Hind and Jai Bharat.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Adi. Pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, sir.